Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claims Corner and today's discussion about Agile leadership. We're talking about a shift from doing Agile to being Agile. My name is Alan Demers, and I'm joined today by Ian Thompson. Ian is the Group Chief Claims Officer at Zurich Insurance, and he brings a global perspective to the conversation. Welcome, Ian, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for the welcome, Alan. Good to be here.
Ian, if you could, please tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Sure. Well, as you said, I work for Zurich Insurance. I'm based out of Zurich, Switzerland, although family is all in the UK. So back before COVID, I used to be a commuter, but now I'm a virtual commuter. I've been working in insurance for probably, it must be over 25 years now. Claims for the last 15 or so years, but before that, various technical and leadership roles across a wide variety of areas. So, listen, it's all on the LinkedIn profile, so I'm not going to drain that. If people are interested in my history, they can go and take a look.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great backdrop, and we're really excited to have you, especially with everything going on this year. And talking about Agile leadership today is perfect timing. To set the stage, we're talking about what it means to have an Agile mindset. And in my opinion, claims leaders have always been really good at juggling and constantly adapting to deliver for the customer, delivering while controlling cost, and delivering while satisfying all the various stakeholders, all at the same time. So, but we're really not talking about multitasking or being reactive or just being responsive. Agile is much more than that. And so as I prepared for the conversation today, I noticed there were a number of different descriptions out there. So in your opinion, or from your point of view, how do you go about defining what Agile leadership is?
Listen, I think that's a really good question, and far brighter people than I have spent a lot of time to work out what that definition should be. I think it's quite difficult to pin down. I mean, I guess if you'd said to a lot of leaders 6 months ago, how agile do you think you are? They probably would have said, well, I can learn a lot more. And then with what many of us have been through over the last 6 months, it's forced us to be agile. Why? Because we've had to suddenly become more flexible than we've ever had to be before. We've had to work out on the run what the priorities are. And therefore, I think, this is a mindset around this flexibility and being responsive, and particularly taking inputs from outside of ourselves and particularly outside of maybe our normal routes of information to decide what is the right path, what is the right decision.
It kind of reminds me of catastrophe response. Organizations get that stimulation from having to do what's right for the customer in a moment's notice and really respond. And sometimes that energy and enthusiasm really cascades across the organization, and you learn how to do things better. But there also could be some fatigue factors, and I'll get into that when we start talking about work from home and your business interruption. But when did your organization start using Agile formally?
So I guess it was around about 10 years ago. We started to bring Agile techniques into our IT development projects. And really, it's grown from there to today, when we have a specific team dedicated to developing our Agile capabilities, not just in the center, but within the countries, and particularly, design thinking type principles and how you try to build programs and projects that are iterative, and you try and you test and you learn and you move on.
I think that's a great foundation. And, were you able to use Agile project management to speed up the decision-making with your Agile leadership?
Yeah, and I think it's funny. I think sometimes people can get a little bit scared by these forms of project management because, we're all used to the good old Gantt chart and working through against those triangles for milestones, etc. But we've been using it on a couple of things. So I've got two programs that I'm supporting at the moment. One is around evolving our workforce, which is working out how we build skills and capabilities for the future. That's cross-functional. It's not a claims project. It's a group operations project. And there, really, we're using the momentum and the energy of the team members to actually steer that and just keep coming back to the outcome. But actually, they're shaping that direction, and that's been hugely successful. And that is a truly virtual program. And everybody's been used to working in a virtual environment because we have such a multi geography basis to the way we operate. So I think that's a great example about actually how you can use the energy and passion to actually shape these things rather than a traditional project management framework or straitjacket even.
That makes sense. It really does make sense. I would imagine there's a number of challenges in becoming an agile organization. What are some of the things that you've run into so far that have gotten your way?
Well, I think the first thing is that, somebody thinks to be agile, what you do is you go off and you watch those couple of YouTube videos that are kind of archetypal examples of how companies became agile. And then you come back and go, hey, it's easy. We just do this. That's not the case. Secondly, and there are many aspects of this, but it's a cultural thing as well. You've got to take on board what agile means. And I think one of the most difficult is taking risks, learning it's okay to fail, because actually failure brings experience and it brings a greater strength to the delivery that you eventually make. And that culturally is very difficult in some organizations to embrace failure as a learning point.
That's a great point. I think it's really difficult, especially in claims, because sometimes when you make a failure, it can really impact customers or it can impact your performance, your results. And there's probably just that natural inclination not to admit that mistakes were made. So how do you go about teaching an organization that it's okay to fail and okay to make some mistakes?
Well, look, there are many facets to this. I guess one of the ways in which you can gain a greater acceptance around the learning points from the mistakes you make is making sure that you build in reflection. So we're great at delivering on projects, and whether those be agile or otherwise, but we rarely actually step back after the project and go, hey, what did we learn from this that we can take away and apply and be better at the next one? And I think this is really true in Agile, is how you learn from the experience of the Agile development and you take away learnings from that and apply it, and particularly where it comes from something maybe that's not worked. Because without that reflection time, it feels a little bit like people are maybe brushing it under the carpet, don't really want to talk about it. No, you've got to get it out there. I think the other thing, and this is really hard, is you need to celebrate the mistakes that have been made along the way, the errors that have been made, and what you've learned from them as part of the celebration of the success of something.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and some of it sounds like very common sense. It's something we probably do in our daily lives. You make a mistake, you talk about it, you learn what you did wrong, and you usually vow not to ever do that again. I read somewhere where organizations that are good at this have developed a return on learning type of metric. So they actually measure what they've learned from the mistakes. They probably measured, what they return on learning from positives as well. But just having some good structure around keeping track of what your progress is in that department, I think does help others see that making mistakes is okay, so long as you just don't keep making them.
Oh, well, I think it's always the rule, isn't it? Is, by the time that you make the same mistake 3 times, you've done something really wrong on this and you're not really learning from it.
Great point. So we talked a little bit earlier about the work from home. You can't help escape that conversation. It's everywhere. But how does working from home impact agile transformation?
So I think on the face of it, the concern would be, if we've been talking about this prior to the last few months, that actually, it's very difficult to do agile if you've not got people in the room with a flip chart or, with that brown paper around the walls. I think the truth is that this has proven that you can work extremely well virtually on agile projects. And there are plenty of tools out there that will actually replicate what you'd usually do in that workshop environment physically together to give you that capability. I think the other thing is that we've got to credit ourselves with is we have learned far more about what it means to be agile than we probably could have learned through some course or other, or if anybody had said us, in 6 months this is how you'll be working, and that's been incredible right the way through the organization, through to everybody working in our teams. I'm just so proud of how they just adapted to the environment.
That's a really good point and a silver lining. I can't imagine you could recreate this type of atmosphere, and it's unfortunate that we're all in the predicament that we are. But the upside has been kind of that situational adjustment that everyone's had to make that you mentioned. I think
No,
that's
that's fair. I mean, it's a human tragedy, and you can't get away from that. But focusing in on the job that needs to be done and how we keep moving forward as organisations and as communities, I think is the really important aspect of this.
no doubt. And Ian, everyone kind of adapts at a different pace. Um, so how do you bring others along? I mean, you always have those that jump right in and they're very adaptable, and then you have some that need more encouragement, and then you have some on the tail end, I suppose, that take a bit longer. So how do you address all those different paces?
Sure. Well, I think we've all looked at those models around learning, and the truth is that 70% of our development actually comes from learning on the job. So there is nothing better, I think, than actually getting people involved in agile projects, giving them the opportunity, and bringing a mix of experience around working agile into a particular environment. So, we talk about the project environment, but then if you talk about a leadership environment where it's more operational, then I think it's maybe a bit more nuanced, but it is still around, I think, most importantly, is giving people the opportunity to experience it and help with coaching and mentoring and support with those that have got more experience or have more aptitude towards it. Formal training has definitely got a place to play, but I'm a big advocate of giving people the support they need to actually jump in there and start learning as they go.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing you say a few times over about repetition, getting right in there and, in other words, practicing and actually doing and adjusting on the fly versus training and trying to condition and assuming that that would be the only way to do it.
No, definitely. And I think as well is that we all learn in different ways, and therefore any learning has got to be very much tailored to the individual. But I think that mix of theory and practice is really important. And sometimes when you've actually done something for a while and then you go to the classroom training or the more formal training, you really understand what it is you don't know as well as what you do know, and you can create more opportunity to benefit from the training and the theory.
So we did talk a little bit about training, and it's probably more in the category of skills. So what kind of upskilling do you think is necessary to become an agile organization?
The way we're playing it is that we are developing a core team of expertise that are both supporting in terms of particular programs, some of the ones I've already described, but also through doing that are actually spreading their knowledge. So by engaging in these projects with people who have got well-formed experience around agile, those getting involved in the projects are developing the skills, sometimes without actually realizing it. So that's helping with a kind of a change in mindset. I think the other thing is, and this is the leadership challenge, is that quite often the larger the organization, the more there is a silo-driven approach to things. And I think part of this agility mindset is working horizontally across organizations and joining experience in different areas. And back to maybe where I started around, I believe that part of this agile leadership question is how open you are to inputs and thoughts and ideas from other areas and how that shapes your direction. And I think we've got great opportunities in organizations to do that just within the organization and within the knowledge that maybe we don't connect.
So I'm sure you've had to think about what some of goals and success may look like with agile leadership. And maybe you can even talk about some of the successes that you've actually had. So I won't put you on, I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. But as we're talking about it, it's like anything else you try to go out, set out to do, that you want to have a vision of what that outcome should be. So what does agile leadership success look like?
One of the things we've learned is that you need to be really outcome based, and therefore success is defined at the start. So rather than admiring the process and deeming success to be the completion of the process, you're judging your success by whether or not you met your outcome goals, or indeed whether you agree to modify those outcome objectives through the process and through the program, but still therefore gain success. You alluded to it, success could be about an increase in capabilities within the team, but certainly, things that come through very strongly for me is around speed to market and the ability to develop ideas from conception through to reality really quickly. I think to look at the ways that we're applying it as well, there's a lot here around customer. So the use of far greater customer insight means that those outcomes that you're really driving at is to see far greater customer engagement and far greater uh, positive feedback from the customer about what you developed actually meets their needs or addresses a problem that they've had. Maybe before we wouldn't have tested that, or maybe before we would have assumed we knew what the customer wanted, and then find we were pretty wide of the mark by the time we delivered.
Yeah, and I kind of think about it for claims. You have operations, so maybe talk a little bit about that. Has agile leadership impacted how claims operations function? Or, when I think of some of the things that have to happen, it's, not only handling the claims, but leadership playing a role in granting authority, and supporting, in driving toward outcomes to resolve claims. So have you seen any impact in terms of the claim handling from an operation perspective?
Yeah, so we've like most, if not all, organisations, we're looking at process automation, the application of machine learning, and areas like that. And this is a prime example about where getting some people who are kind of thinking the right way and getting them linked into the technology automation opportunities, and then giving them the chance to see what they can push and develop through testing. We've had some great examples on that. And one of the things sometimes is adoption on that, because everybody sees this as, the robots taking our jobs away. Starting with some people who get the process, giving them a bit of training in what robots, automated process actually means, and then allowing them to go and find the things that are actually the real drags on everybody's energy, are the things that you have to keep doing but you really hate doing, and process automating those has been a real way in which we've got people engaged and has built different skills in the team.
You mentioned something there about the fear of losing jobs. That was a pretty strong theme for the last couple of years, especially with the artificial intelligence growth and the thought that claim work would be displaced by automation. Has that changed at all now that everybody's kind of cast into this situation?
No, I don't think it's gone away. In many contexts, I'd say that this has really accelerated certain aspects of it. I mean, virtual assessment is something that there's been much greater customer acceptance of and much greater deployment in the environment we found ourselves in. But look, all the work I've done around this, and the working with our colleagues in HR and our digital guys, is that there are far more roles that are going to be augmented by automation than are going to be lost through automation. And look, there are many different dimensions to this, but really we need to find ways in which we can utilize the opportunity for automation to give more value added time back into the process, particularly around customer and particularly around correct claims decision. And too much of our time of our people is spent on those routine tasks that we could take away, and then we can really get into having a more fulfilling role for people and adding far greater enhancements to service.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think it's much more of a partnership, people and tools, as it's always been. The tools just get better, and yes, some roles will be impacted more than others, but I think it's bringing those two resources together that's going to make the difference.
It's true. And sorry, and just to build on that, this is why we're spending a lot of time and energy around this evolve the workforce, because what we're trying to work out now is, traditionally we might recruit and run direction and say, hey, look, we want great litigators as great claims handlers. Actually, the range of skills that we need in claims in the future is going to be much wider than that we have now. And that's where we need to be making the investment to allow our people to develop and grow into the roles that are needed in the future.
That's a terrific point. I think it's a time to really get people excited about it, especially because there's such a higher demand from the customer side to do things more automated and more touch-free. It just helps adjusters and leaders understand what roles they can play in bringing those things to life. So I think it's an exciting future, especially when you bring them in and make them part of the solution. I wanted to move on to, you touched a little bit about what success looks like, but, probably good here to talk about how you go about measuring improvement or measuring agile leadership improvement. I should be more precise.
Yeah, listen, it's a tough one because quite often it's a mindset change. So I think, one of the things again is and to kind of build on the last points around this is one is speed and speed of execution. So yeah, what Agile should give you is the ability to make incremental changes in a shorter space of time than you've done before. And as we talked about, even if that means it's not quite worked out, you've tested it, you've learned from it, and you've gone again. Then when you link it into what we're seeing around that customer environment, and clearly is customer demands are increasing at a far greater rate than we're currently set up to actually respond to. And we can get really complacent around how our transactional net promoter scores are looking. And hey, great, it's really positive, but the customer expectations are increasing all the time. So keeping pace with those and being able to measure that you're actually addressing the pain points, you're doing something different is another great output measure. And then I think, of course, in the more traditional claims context is leakage, and whether or not you're adapting all the time to recognise where the processes need to evolve, so that new areas of leakage or potential opportunities to change the way you do things to get a better claim outcome, and ultimately, therefore, a better indemnity cost. Then that gives you another key metric as well.
You made me think of something here about addressing pain points, and I think that's a great way to measure your success. Is in the first place, if you have a good understanding of what the customer pain points or the problem spots are. And I say that while most people think, well, we know that customers really dislike unreturned phone calls or delays in the processing of their claim. Those tend to be the top types of complaints that most organizations face. So we can easily say, that happens. But what we don't always know is what's the underlying cause of that pain point, what drives it in the first place. And so if you first have a good understanding of what those problems are, and then you can have them prioritized, and then certainly measure your agile leadership success based on how well you're addressing them. I'm reading into what you were talking about there, but it just made me think of all that as a good way to get started.
Yeah, no, really true. One of the agile programs that I'm sponsoring at the moment is around claims customer excellence, and we've really come from the angle of let's get the customer insight before we kick off on anything. And we've got 9 key points of customer insight that that's a whole other session. But taking these 9, we've then kind of looked at what we do, and we've identified that really it's around people, communication, and information, the areas that we need to focus on now. If you've been around in claims long enough, you'll know that those are truisms. The fact is, though, that we can admire the problem for too long, but now we've got to do something because we really do have to step up to the challenge from our customers on these things.
No doubt. So here's the big question. I want to talk about this for a little bit as we get to the final part of the conversation is what do you see around the corner? Let's talk about that. And then really how does agile leadership help you get there? So what's the next horizon for claims? Let's tackle that one first.
Yeah, next horizon for claims. Geez, we feel like we're already in the middle of something now. We're not quite sure what, never mind next normal, new normal, whatever the normal is. But I mean, I think that actually sets a challenge for us right now, which is how do we take what we've developed in a really short space of time. I mean, if you looked at how we've moved for most organizations, most claims teams, from a office-based, largely office-based operation to now a flexible home working operation in a matter of months, we'd set out as a program, we would have been looking at a 5-year program to get there, and we've done it in 5 months. So how do we build on that and take away the positives, but how do we avoid the pitfalls? An obvious one, it's great that everybody's working from home, but it requires different leadership skills. In claims, as with anything, there's a whole different skills you need in leading a virtual team versus an office-based team. And then let's take capability development. How much of the learning, particularly on the technical aspects of any claim, whether it's auto or the most complex workers' comp claim, it is built by being next to somebody who's seen a bit more than you, done a bit more than you, and you can turn to them and go, hey, what do you think about this? You could do that really easily in a physical environment, but how are you going to do that in a virtual environment? So I think one of the next challenges for claims is how we build on that. And undoubtedly, there's digital and automation sitting right in the center of that. So part of this horizon for us is how do we grasp the opportunity this has given us to really put claims at the forefront of thinking and translate that into that executive commitment for investment to do far more around automation of customer interaction and processes, far more about driving one and done and straight through processing, and far more about driving as well customer self-service. Look, yeah, isn't it amazing? You and I can order a book from Amazon for $4, and we'll get emails every step of the way telling us the book's, ordered, it's in, it's processed delivery, it's out for delivery, it's delivered. And then we take somebody's $40,000 automobile and they have to do all the chasing to find out where it's up to. Now, there are plenty of great claims teams out there that have addressed that problem, but there's still a lot that we can do around that. But that is got to be our benchmark, and that's how we've got to look at this.
Yeah. So, and I agree with your beginning on that one. It's like we already have conquered quite a bit. So it's like, wait a minute, there's more coming. And I think it's a really sober discussion about, I think you're talking about the sustainability of working remotely or working in an agile work environment. Those things are going to take a lot of care and fostering. I think, we think of all kinds of things like fatigue and just some of the things you mentioned about the impromptu discussions that would happen in a meeting environment. So we'll need to find ways to make those things happen, no doubt. Ian, is there anything else that you'd add on top of, now that you've given us a little bit view of the future, would you add to that, how does agile leadership help us get there?
That flexibility that I talked about right from the start is going to be the massive enabler to this, because the pace of change and the typical leadership approach of kind of looking at patterns that we've seen in the past and applying them to the present and the future maybe aren't so reliable as they used to be. And look, from my perspective, the future for claims is really, really bright. It's a really exciting place to be, but we're going to take our people with this. And somebody far better than me once said, the role of the leader is to define reality and give hope. And I think we've all been doing that over the past months, but now we translate that into our leadership, which is going to have to be responsive and flexible and very, very agile as we go into these next phases.
I really like that quote, and I'm going to ask you to repeat it so I can write it down. And they can take that away, because that's a good one to use. And then we'll end it on that high note.
Excellent. Well, as I said, the role of a leader is to define reality and give hope.
Excellent. You can't say it any better than that, so I won't try to. Ian, I want to thank you for your time today and your thoughtful comments and input here. I think it's really helpful for everyone that's out there trying to figure out agile leadership or even get started. It's just like we were a few years ago around innovation, and InsurTech, it takes some time for everyone to get there. So I think this was a really valuable conversation, and I appreciate everything you're doing to help support us, and wish you extremely well with your agile leadership transformation.
My pleasure, and thank you, Alan.
Thank you, and have a great day.